Welcome to the panel discussion. Annie, are you okay? My name is Natasha Say-Salem. I'm a technology leader, and I'm also known for being the founder of Empowering Women with Tech. If you don't follow us, go on to @EmpowerWithTech on Twitter and join the group. So the COVID pandemic created a sudden shift to working from home for the vast majority of us, forever altering how people work. One of the biggest transformations to our lives as a result of the pandemic has been the wide-scale adoption of remote working. Whilst in the past, remote working might have been something you might have got a line manager's permission for, it's now the daily reality for many. Whole offices are empty and switched to remote working practices, and this is now transforming the way we work and interact with each other. Gone are the long days of commuting from home to work and to back again. Millions were given time back, which they could use how they wanted. And while there's been a lot of pluses, there's a lot of things that we've had to adapt to, which we'll explore in this panel. A lot of the issues we are currently experiencing with remote working stem from the fact it was introduced so radically. It was almost immediate because people were told to stay safe from coronavirus. The pandemic has allowed people to work from home in not ideal conditions. It's a global experiment on keeping safe, not a proper global experiment on remote working. So we're going to explore lessons learned too. I have a fabulous panel for you today. We have Christelle, Paulina, and Annette, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. Christelle.
Hi everybody, I'm Christelle Hakeler and I'm the IT Director at Arsenal Football Club.
Hi, I'm Paulina Jämsä. I'm Global Manager at Siemens, and I'm also international speaker. I'm passionate about representation of women in technology events and so on. I used to be absolutely terrified of public speaking, but my vision to help was much stronger than staying in my room and just typing.
Hi everyone, my name's Annette Sercombe. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the Met Office. So my responsibilities are for cybersecurity and for business continuity and resilience, which has obviously been pretty busy over the last few months.
Brilliant, thanks ladies. So we will be trying to pick up some questions at the end. So if you have any comments or questions, please use the questions tab on the right hand side of your screen and I'll try and get to them at the end of the session. So first things first is around effectively, one of the things that I found in lockdown, especially in lockdown 1, is this sense in technology of constantly feeling on. With push notifications in Slack and in emails, it kind of felt like the lines between work and home were blurring so much that I couldn't really disconnect from tech. And I suppose my first question is really, have you got any advice to people who are feeling overwhelmed with kind of constantly being on with working from home, and any advice of how they can disconnect from tech? So Christelle, over to you.
Well, I agree that it's a challenge, and I know that I'm very lucky. So whilst I'm in a tiny spare bedroom, I know I'm very lucky because at the end of the day, I shut the door and I can leave, and not everybody is that lucky. But what I've certainly heard from some people is if they can just carve out a physical corner in a room or have an area where they work, but they can cover it up with a tablecloth or something, just something that they can't see at the end of the day. But physical space aside and actually being able to walk out of a room or cover something up, apart from that, I think we need to be really disciplined about things like push notifications. Do you really need to know every time you get an email or every time you have a Teams message? So I'm personally very selective. I actually have an Apple Watch, but most of my notifications are turned off. Just my Teams messages are the only ones I keep on. And I think we also need to be really disciplined around saying, okay, when have I finished my day? And literally when I'm finished, like I said, I can shut the door, but if you can't do that, shut down the lid of your laptop and walk away. That's my advice.
I think that's great advice. Paulina, how have you found disconnecting from tech?
I've actually worked from home since June 2019, so the COVID thing wasn't such a huge thing for me. One big change was, though, that
Absolutely. And I think I think that's really good advice. And then Annette, I mean, obviously the weather never sleeps. You know, for a lot of us, you know, some of us have to be on call outs, whether it's, you know, call outs or 24/7 call outs. Have you kind of got any advice of kind of how you've managed that, especially when obviously people being in lockdown, probably hitting your services more than they would normally?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and certainly getting used to, because I mean I was used to working 1 day a week from home, but for a lot longer you really do have to prioritize. But I think the most important thing is as a leadership team, you're making sure you're setting a good example. You know, going through this on each of those different tools, there's different notification settings, so you can turn things off and on, and you can know when you're going to be available, when you're not. So I think if you're open about that, and if you set a good example to people, then that's one of the most important things. I think it's a good point with regard to being on support and if you've got an incident, but you've got to remember that burnouts also really can happen, and so you need to make sure that, you know, people have regular breaks, that they're taking time out, that, you know, that even on also not burning out over that period. So having those conversations up front, I think, is really important. And definitely just setting a good example, really, and taking care of yourselves. I mean, I'm lucky, it's a space I can go for walks, and we have a daily stand up at 12 o'clock, but it's only 10 minutes, so that's quite useful. I've got like a route that I can have a lunch break, and you know, my team can as well, so that's worked quite well for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the key things for me as a leader is you need to practice what you preach. That if I see many of my colleagues emailing me at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, it was kind of slightly different for me because I do compound hours. So I will work into the evenings. But if I saw other people doing it, I would call it out and say, look, you know, don't work right now. You don't, you know, you've done your hours, you know, disconnect, go and, you know, watch some Netflix, or go and make some banana bread or a sourdough starter or whatever you were doing. But I think as leaders, we've got to call this stuff out, right?
Definitely.
Absolutely. And one other tip, because I had a fear of missing out something important. So you know how many channels we have. We have Slack, Teams, Yammer, email, phone, everything. I teach my team and my management, actually. I told them tips, you know, which they appreciate, by the way. I said there's only one channel that's urgent for me, and that's Slack. If you message me in Slack, your other channels I'm not even checking, and that works. And you know what? I don't have to go and check my email just in case there would be an email that's urgent. It's clear that it's one channel, urgent channel, and that's it.
Absolutely.
So that's my tip as well.
That's a brilliant tip. And we've got Penny Hodge, who said, it's good to remind yourself and your teams that because you can now work anytime, anywhere, doesn't mean that you should work all the time, everywhere, which I think is a great point, Penny. And so kind of moving on to a very kind of similar topic, one of the other things that I noticed in lockdown one, which I hope isn't as much of an issue now, was that, you know, that sort of, you know, point that Penny makes about, you know, you shouldn't work all the time everywhere. I started to get sneaky calendar invites that would go in at like 7 in the morning or potentially 7 in the evening, because, effectively we were running out of spaces for meetings. And one of the other things that it felt was it was starting to get quite overwhelming, that it was almost like a conveyor belt line of sort of bang, 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 meeting, where previously in the office, we would walk between meetings or, potentially have a conversation or go make a coffee. But it just felt like there was one team call after another, or Zoom call, or whatever your device of choice is. How do you kind of break that sort of overwhelming feeling of meeting after meeting after meeting? Have you got any tips of how you've kind of tried to kind of claw back some of that time? I know that, Paulina, you've mentioned a few good tips about the meetings, but is that something you guys experienced in lockdown 1 as well?
Oh, one thing I would like to say, Natasha, first of all, I think it's about respect, actually. And I have a rule: if I ask anyone to work even past 5 o'clock, are you okay to work past 5 o'clock? I think just to assume that people can attend a meeting at 7 o'clock, I think is just disrespectful. The other tip, I mean, I have always done this my whole career, and notwithstanding the fact it's even more important during COVID, but I have always blocked out my lunch hour. And I know one of my friends is on a call. Donna, if you're listening, even at Sainsbury's, I had a reputation for having to eat. But not only do I have to eat at midday, but I've realised now that I have to have a proper break. And that's what I do. Always block that out in my diary.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant piece of advice. And it's so easy to do, but it makes such a difference. Annette, from your perspective, have you kind of found this sort of back-to-back meeting culture? Is there more things we can do around meeting etiquette and kind of keeping to time?
Definitely. I think I found the same as you. Like, if you're moving between meetings when you're in the office, it's that you get a little bit of a break, don't you? One thing that I've been trying to do a bit more is to not have, meetings don't have to last an hour for a start, and things like 10-minute meetings even means you've got 20 minutes after the meeting that you can be moving between things. But you should empower people, and you have got control of your own calendar. So if you book out time in between and say, look, actually I need a gap between these two things to absorb it or to do something else, then people should respect that in your calendars as well. And we should be making sure people are getting those breaks in between, because they're not going to be as productive if you're just moving from one to another straight after each other. So those are some techniques. One thing I did find quite useful is, and I know with Office 365 you get a lot of analytics as to how many meetings you have and what times of day, and using that to reflect and try and reduce a bit, I think is quite a useful thing to do. Yeah,
no, that's great advice, Annette. And Paulina, as somebody who has worked from home for a while now, is there something, the fact that we're so overly reliant on sort of video calls, and that we should have maybe more discipline about the mode of communication that we should be using each time? Is that something that you've kind of looked at whilst you've obviously done a lot more working from home than maybe some others?
Yes, so I always question, is there a need for the meeting? First of all, if there's no if there's a meeting invite and there's no agenda, I reply back before I'm accepting. I reply back what's the goal of the meeting. Secondly, just like what Annette said, it doesn't have to be 1 hour. It doesn't have to be half an hour. Actually, I've realized that the time is, let's say, if you have a meeting for 1 hour, people find a way to fill up that 1 hour. If you say it's half an hour, suddenly you can do and deal with it for half an hour. If you stretch to 15 minutes, people are much more focused because they know they only have 15 minutes to do it. And I highly recommend doing that. So even if someone sends you 1 hour, just say, hey, I've read this in this article about productivity and I've tested it, it works well. Shall we try it as a test? If it doesn't work, no problem, we do 1 hour next time. People say yes, because it's just a test, it's not really commitment. And you know what? They end up loving it. That's my experience on that.
I think that's such a great piece of advice, because ultimately you can always have another meeting afterwards, but also it's really nice time to have some time to reflect as well, so that you can have a very short, succinct meeting, easy for you to say, and then have some time to reflect and then pick up if you need another meeting afterwards, or actually if emails or a Slack message might suffice instead.
My advice, though, or other way around, you ask me about communication styles. Also check how long are you using for those emails. Because if you start seeing a huge email chain with long replies, sometimes just scheduling in 10 minutes with all the participants is going to solve everything. And it's actually going to save you time and bad feelings, because when I notice that the email chain is getting passive aggressive, which often happens with the OK dot, for example, from someone who never uses dot in the end, you know, subtle things. If I see that happening, I schedule a call immediately, because it's better to handle it when it's tiny than when it becomes a monster, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose one of the other things about being in lockdown and working from home is the human connection. And it's probably the thing that many of us, me included, miss the most. You know, for some of us, we've started, you know, new jobs remotely and haven't, you know, met any of our new colleagues face to face. For others, it could be just the complexities of building relationships and communicating with your squads, your teams, your colleagues, building relationships with your stakeholders, even as simple as one-to-ones. And so I guess the question is really, you know, have you got any tips for people listening about how we foster and grow relationships in a sort of virtual online way? So if I start with Annette first.
Sure, no, it's a good question actually, and I've quite a few new starters during the lockdown period. Plus, my sister started a new job as well during that period, and I've seen how difficult it can be when you're trying to create relationships. One thing that I found quite good is to have like informal time, like coffees, and also what we have is something called random coffees. Where you have like a mixture of people you're allocated to for the organization, and you're just there for a coffee, so they're just having a chat and having a coffee, but you make connections with other people in different areas across the organization, and I think that works really well. But having some more sort of fun time, or time to just explore more, if people are willing to share, then things about their personal life and other stuff that's going on can be really, really valuable when it comes to building that team morale and making sure everyone's able to work together. I do think during lockdown and this type of thing, it does put a lot of pressure onto line managers, especially when you've got new staff. And that's something that we've been reflecting on as well. So giving extra support to your line managers, because they need the support in order to support their staff, and especially when they may be feeling lonely and they've got other things going on as well. So I think that's something to reflect on.
Yeah, no, I think that's an incredibly interesting point, and something that Imogen, who is watching, has kind of reflected on as well. She asks, for people who've started their careers during COVID, are any of the panel doing anything in addition to supporting their onboarding and helping them settle into working life? I don't know, Paulina or Christelle, if there is any advice you could give Imogen on that one.
I have to say, I have absolute sympathy for anybody that's had to start a new job during this lockdown. I mean, I personally would have hated it. I don't know if I can give you any specific advice about new joiners, because I've had one, but as it happened, he knew his line manager before, which has really helped with his transition. But just generally a couple of things that I've done to try and keep that human connection. I now have, I think was it Annette or Paulina mentioned a 10-minute stand-up every day. I have that with my direct management team. And sometimes we talk about nothing but last night's football result. And as you probably know, it wasn't great on Sunday for Arsenal, but literally sometimes we don't even talk about work. And we never used to talk every morning like that. And that's been really helpful. And the other thing is, when we have our larger team meetings, I absolutely try and encourage my team to open up. And I think you probably all agree, IT people aren't known for being the most extrovert people in general, but I've really made an effort to encourage my team. They have to keep their cameras on, because I said, well, you wouldn't walk around the office with a paper bag on your head, would you? Keep your cameras on and share a little bit about yourself or how you're feeling. And then the final thing is, again, I think we need to be more approachable than ever as leaders. And we use Teams. I'm sure other technologies are similar, but people in my team know if there's a little green dot by my name, that means I'm not in a meeting or on a call. And absolutely, I encourage them to call me, which they're doing more and more. So I think, yeah, all of those things, encourage people to be open, more contact, more chit chat, and be approachable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Paulina, what's kind of your thoughts on this? Obviously, as somebody who's worked from home quite a bit, how, have you got any sort of great tips around forging successful sort of working relationships virtually?
Funny enough, because my team is in Germany, I've always worked kind of virtual. So even if I was in the UK office, they weren't really my colleagues, directly. So I have to say that what comes to onboarding, just the fact that I love, Christelle, that you said you can always call me, because I would have loved that when I started, that I just pick up a phone and have a chat, a little bit of attention from the line manager, I know that everyone's very busy, but that's something that at least for the new starters, the company should give. But I have to say that even for existing employees, that one-to-one coffee, even if I would go out for a walk and my boss goes out for a walk and, we just chat on WhatsApp or whatever, but it's a nice chat that's actually outside of the home office, so to speak. That might be a nice idea as well. Other idea is I forged a lot of connections via LinkedIn. Actually, because LinkedIn is a social thing, you can you can comment, and you get to know the people better, because they're not just talking about the work, but you can see what they're passionate about. Are they passionate about same thing that you are? You create kind of your own tribe, so to speak.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's some really great advice. And I think from my perspective, my advice would be to always try and create a human connection. So one of the things that I would recommend is when new starters join an existing squad, or if you join an existing team, doing icebreaker exercises. So getting the squad together and doing sort of something like 3 things. So tell the group 3 things that have contributed to shaping the person you are today: experiences, events, people's stories. And maybe also a really nice exercise is the stinky fish exercise. So it's about sharing fears, anxieties, and uncertainties. The purpose is to create openness. The stinky fish is a metaphor for that thing you carry around but you don't want to talk about, but the longer you hide it, the stinkier it gets. So I think there's some really nice icebreaker exercises that I would personally recommend to do. And it's always really nice to do it even with a mature squad if one person's coming in, but certainly if you've got a lot of new starters, that's the things that you miss, is those water cooler moments, having those sort of serendipitous, catch-ups before or after a meeting, or walking to a different building, which it's nice to try and recreate virtually. So then we're moving on to a very similar topic, which is around loneliness. And I think one of the things that I really was concerned about as a line manager was the loneliness for a lot of people, especially if they were living by themselves and potentially, in studio apartments, and it was a lot of the younger members of staff, in my experience, who were kind of new to the job and, we are now obviously, you know, in a second lockdown, there might be potentially others. I'd be curious to ask if you have any tips of how you as leaders try to address loneliness, or any markers to identify it, or any tips for any of the people listening. So Christelle, what would be your advice on this?
I think first of all is make sure you understand the circumstances that your team are in. So make sure you know that that person lives on their own or in a studioed apartment, or one guy actually lives with his wife. They have a newborn baby, but he said he hasn't got any green space for miles around, which shocked me, because he lives somewhere in London, but apparently he doesn't have a park around the corner, and even that's really, really hard as well. So I think the first thing is you have to listen and understand the situations that people are in, and then all I feel I can do as a leader is just offer that support. Again, just encourage people to be open. I love that idea of asking people about their stinking fish. I'm definitely going to use that. But I think you just need to form those relationships on a personal level, and people will naturally open up more. And if they open up, then you can support them more.
Absolutely. Annette, from your perspective, has that been, you know, something that you've kind of experienced in your teams? And you know, how have you kind of put in steps at the Met Office to, you know, buddy systems or more regular one-to-ones to help colleagues who are, you know, suffering in the lockdown?
Definitely from the very beginning, it was something that we kind of thought about, and can, you know, there's certain people it definitely affects more. And so certainly within my team, on my wider area, we kind of looked at who are those people who might be more at risk, and making sure that you're having regular catch-ups with them, but that the teams themselves tend to foster that culture and look after each other. So if they, you know, if you've got good examples in some teams where they're doing that, maybe they're having like a catch-up and just talking. Some of them have random like joke sessions every morning, or different things where they're trying to check in with people and keep an eye on them. I think that can work really well. I mean, we do have like an employee assist program that people can use, so they can phone people up and have counselling and support if they need it. And there's certainly other elements that we put up, and advice and guidance to help people. I've personally noticed that the more people who are more extroverts seem to be struggling with it more, perhaps, than some of those who are more introverted, but it can be quite variable. We also have like visiting scientists, so they can be people who haven't been able to go home for a year or something, and sometimes even with young families, so that we've got like international networks and different networks in the organization that we can help to make sure that they're in touch with people who are similar to them, and that they can talk through some of those challenges with them. But a lot of it was just what it comes down to, what you're saying, is just listening and being understanding and being flexible with their work, being flexible with what they might be able to do, and also helping them if they do need to come into the office, because that's going to help them in some way, you know, making allowances and trying to kind of just, yeah, help support them really.
No, that's great. I think, Paulina, I think we might have video trouble with Paulina. So whilst Paulina's just joining us back again, another topic which is close to my heart is I'm very proud parent of 2 young daughters, and I think I'm a really resilient person. I can handle a lot of things. I am the multitasking queen of at least Yorkshire, potentially the north of England, including Scotland. And but one of the things I really struggled with was trying to do a full-time job, homeschool my eldest, and offer a creche facility for my youngest. It is probably the hardest thing I've done, you know, and I've given birth twice. You know, Christelle, you're a mum as well. How was that for you, and what lessons or best practices did you learn off the back of that, especially now with, you know, unfortunately kids again having to be isolating and getting off school, so it is a never-ending sort of hamster wheel, isn't it?
Absolutely. I guess in some respects I've had it easy because my kids are teenagers, although I do have an isolating daughter who's been off school for 2 weeks, and that in itself has some challenges, just making sure she gets out of the house and that she's okay. But I have to say, again, it goes back to my point about understanding the situation that people are in. I'll never forget one guy really struggled at the start of lockdown, and he had a toddler literally on his head. And he was finding it really hard, and also he was trying to do an MBA at the same time. And actually what I said to him is, right, okay, I'm going to give you study leave. I don't care if that's company policy or not. I'm just going to tell the rest of the team you're on study leave. I think we gave him a day off, a week or something for a while, just to get him through that situation. So I would say, again, get to know your team, understand the situation they're in, and if you can offer them some practical support or flexibility. I mean, if somebody says, well, actually, I can't work during the day because my toddler's running around, but actually I'm happy to work for some hours in the evening, then let them. And that's my philosophy. I think the HR policies have to go out the window a little bit. We just can't afford to be rigid right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, I'm really lucky that my employer gave us additional annual leave to use for caring duties, whether that be for children or for elderly care. And I think another thing is to, if you've got reps at your companies, is look at best practices of what other companies are doing and see if you can implement that in your companies, because otherwise people will leave, and it's a really awful state to be in, where you are so exhausted from working and looking after children, right? And that you've kind of seen it from the other side of the fence with colleagues, haven't you?
Definitely. I think I've got every sympathy. I think I must have had it so easy in comparison. I've had the same thing as Christelle, where you're on a call with somebody and they've got children like on top of them, and sometimes animals and other things, and are on the kitchen table, both women and men actually. And I mean, what's been nice to see is that what I've seen is more of a balance in that. I mean, I work in a male dominated area, but actually as many of the men as the women have been splitting their time and doing flexible hours, and they've just said, look, I can't do a full week, I'm going to do the morning and my wife's going to do the afternoon, or they're splitting it between them, and that's really well understood. And we, even though those people were in senior positions, they were all doing that, and that sets a good example to other people, I think, as well. But yeah, I've got every admiration to anyone who was going through that at that time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I installed in my team was blocking out 12 till 2 o'clock for a no meeting zone, just so that parents or people who were looking after elderly parents could, make a lunch. People who without children could just catch up, have some downtime. Some of the themes that we've talked about, catch up on emails as well, because if you're in bang-to-bang, meetings, you can't even check your emails, because that defeats the purpose of actually being in the present in the meeting. So that was something that I would recommend. But I think Christelle's point around just, finding ways of making it work, because otherwise it just becomes, so draining. My wine bill was horrific through lockdown one. Honestly, I was a hardened Polish drinker. So one of the benefits, I think, about what's happened with the COVID situation is it's really put a focus, rightfully so, on mental health and the positive mental health in the workplace, with mental health first aiders creating a safe environment. And I'm just really curious for people listening, what initiatives you've put in around things like mental health. Paulina, in Siemens, what focus, has the focus changed around that? What initiatives have you got in place around that, which we could maybe learn from?
We've had few festivals, at least in the UK, for the employees that talk about business, but it's a mix with how to handle anxiety. We have mindfulness and all that. So I've seen that sneaking part of the business meetings, which is a pleasure to see. To your point about loneliness, I think this is something that I don't have children, but I see that my colleagues, they are struggling with having kids, male and female both. It's sort of almost bringing equality, because it's sort of now the two parents are in the same situation. That's what I've seen in the Zoom calls, where you have children coming and they're sitting on the laps and stuff, and I almost feel like it brings more humanity and connection, because I didn't know that some of my colleagues had children, so it's understanding that. But also, of course, other point is the loneliness, which is a huge thing, because everyone can see the struggle that the parents have, but like you talked about the loneliness, that's something that someone who's single suddenly realizes, that now that the work has been taken off, work events have been taken off, and you after work you go for drinks and so on. Now you don't have that, so suddenly you realize you don't really have friends. Who do you speak with? If you're single, you don't even have a partner. You can't go and see your family. Like, for example, my family is in Finland. I haven't seen them for a year. It's not a nice place to be, but wonderful things is taking you out of the hamster wheel, because you realize that I need to fill my life with something that matters more than just work. Because if you just work and work and work, in the end, you realize you're missing the crucial things in life.
Absolutely.
And by the way, on that topic, what Siemens does, we have a wonderful coaching community. So we volunteer and coach women voluntarily. We give our time to just speak with them, coach them, help them get over this. And we have hubs all over the world. So that's something that we're doing to contribute, even as employees, and I'm a coach as well, so I give my time to help.
Brilliant. No, that's, and thank you so much for doing that as well, to everyone you're benefiting. For Christelle or for Annette, in Arsenal's, Arsenal FC or at the Met Office, what kind of tools and techniques have you introduced? Things like, mental health first aiders, mindfulness. I'd love to kind of get an insight into what you guys are doing as well.
So I can talk about Arsenal. I mean, first of all, Arsenal as a club talks about mental health really, really openly, which I think is really important. And we have some of those things in place. We have mental health first aiders, and the club has offered some, webinars, whatever you call them, around sort of dealing with anxiety, loneliness, etc. during this period. We also have a mentor network. I was quite surprised actually, because I tend to help chair our women's roundtable. So any woman in the whole of Arsenal, every, I think, 2 to 4 weeks, we get together and literally women just pour their heart out. It's been really, really good. But actually, I've bizarrely been approached to be somebody's mentor, and I was really surprised it was a man. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but there we go. I thought if anyone was going to ask me, it would have been a woman. But so yes, just things like that. And we're lucky we've got a lot of specialists in terms of nutrition, specialist physiotherapists, yoga instructors. So even the Arsenal chef, they've done little webinars for people to watch and learn about those areas of specialization. So I think it's just a case of keeping at it, really. I mean, even now we're still debating what else can we do, because like everybody's recognised, this has just gone on for such a long time now. What else can we do to help people? And it's always about, we've heard some great ideas already about being a bit creative, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I've got a load of lovely questions from the audiences. But we haven't got very much time, so I want really lovely succinct answers, ladies, if that's okay. And then what I'll ask is we'll all jump on to the chat window afterwards and try and answer some questions on there as well. As a manager, it's nice if you call it out, but how do you balance employees' workload and deadlines if they're overloaded and you're unable to recruit more resource or more colleagues to join you? So that sort of feeling under pressure, but yet you're under-resourced. How can, what advice can we give people who are in that situation?
I'm teaching them productivity. So tips how to actually maximize the time you have and the resources you have. Because usually, you know, just with few productivity tips, you can actually have a huge difference. Just like I said, 1 hour meeting or 15 minutes meeting, or no meeting, just email.
Brilliant. That's great. And then last question really quickly. What daily habits do you have to keep motivated and healthy?
Well, I sat outside in the garden. Again, I guess I'm lucky that I've got a garden. I appreciate not everyone does, but I just sat out on our garden bench just to get some daylight, and I rolled my sleeves up and tried to get some rays. But for me, I've noticed if I don't get a bit of daylight, literally, even if that just means, like I said, standing out in the garden for 10 minutes, I really feel it. So that's the one thing I'm quite disciplined in.
I mean, that's a great.
For me, it's the journaling.
Yeah.
I've got a mixture of things. I think I also have lots of space, so I've got a dog and I walk my dog, but I tend to use I use an Oura ring to monitor my sleep and making sure that I'm taking time out, but I also have a sauna now as well, which has been really useful. So a couple of times a week at least I've got time when I can definitely not check my emails, so that's something I've learnt from Finland, it has to be said.
That's a great answer. But listen, we have more questions, but we've unfortunately run out of time. So thank you so much to Christelle, to Annette, and to Paulina. And thank you to everybody who has put all these amazing comments and all these questions in. I'm going to spend some more time as page in disguise to try and answer a few of these things. I hope you have an incredible, great rest of your conference, and speak to you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.